It's live.
So of course the departure of the Prophet ﷺ from Mecca, it reached Medina. News of his departure reached Medina, and the people of Medina, they were anxious. Obviously they knew the situation. They were very well aware of the situation. They were aware of how the Prophet ﷺ, he was in a difficult position, and so as a result of this knowledge, the Ansar, they would gather at a place called Harra, Maqam Harra, each day, and they wanted to catch a glimpse of Rasulullah ﷺ to see if he was coming. So they used to go to this Maqam Harra in the morning. They used to wait over there, and then they would return to their houses at midday. So there was quite a bit of anxiety for Rasulullah ﷺ's arrival. So one day the Ansar, they waited as normal, and they hadn't seen the Prophet ﷺ that day. So they were making their way back to their houses, and the first person to see Rasulullah ﷺ was a Jewish person, and he was standing on top of a mound. So he had seen the Ansar, they were waiting eagerly for the arrival. He noticed that the Ansar were waiting very eagerly for the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ. So he shouted at the top of his voice that, "O children of Qayla," this is where the Aus and Khazraj were from. Their mother her name was Qayla. So he says that, "O children of Qayla, the means of the blessed luck and happiness has arrived. He has finally come." So as soon as the Ansar, they heard this call, they ran and they greeted the Prophet ﷺ, who was they ran to greet Rasulullah ﷺ, who was in the shade of a date palm. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he was there, and they were of similar age. Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he was 3 years younger than the Prophet ﷺ, so their age was very similar. And of course, many of the Ansar, they never really saw the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, you had the Ansar who participated in both pledges, and after which the Prophet ﷺ sent Mus'ab bin Umayr and Abdullah bin Maktoum to teach the Ansar about Islam. So a lot of them, they really had not seen the Prophet ﷺ. So the people, they started to crowd around both Rasulullah ﷺ and Abu Bakr, but they didn't know which of the two was the Blessed Prophet. So it's only when Rasulullah ﷺ came out of the shade and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh stood up and shaded him with his sheet that they recognized who was Rasulullah ﷺ. So on that day, the call of takbir could be heard in the whole locality of Banu Amr ibn Auf. So this locality was in a place called Quba. So Quba, it's approximately, and this is where Rasulullah ﷺ came first. So he didn't come to the area where the masjid would be built, but he came to Quba first. So 3 miles, Quba is 3 miles outside of Medina, and it lies towards the south of Medina. And you did have a number of families from the Ansar who resided in Quba. And the largest tribe in Quba was the family of Amr ibn Auf, and the leader of this tribe was Kulthum ibn Hidam. So when Rasulullah arrived in Quba, he stayed in the house of Kulthum ibn Hidam. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he stayed with Khubayb ibn Asaf. So these were some Ansari companions who stayed, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, stayed with them. So the Ansar, they started, when word got out, they just started coming from all directions to see Rasulullah ﷺ, to present their greetings. Now, keep in mind that during this time, Ali radiallahu anh, he had stayed behind. So he had stayed behind in Mecca after Rasulullah ﷺ had left for Medina, And the Prophet ﷺ had entrusted him to return the belongings which people had placed in the care and trust of the Prophet ﷺ. So Ali radiallahu anh, he stayed behind for this purpose, and this shows the concern of the Prophet ﷺ when it came to the belongings of others. He made sure that those belongings were given to someone trustworthy. It was and this was Ali radiallahu anh, was trustworthy, and he returned the amanat, he returned the belongings to the respective people that owned them. So Ali radiallahu anh, he stayed in Makkah for 3 days and 3 nights, and then after returning everyone's items, he too left for Medina, and he reached Quba, and he stayed in the house of Kulthum ibn Hidam with the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ, obviously, Ali radiallahu anh, of course, Ali radiallahu anh, he grew up in the household of Rasulullah ﷺ, and he was one of the first converts. Ali radiallahu anh was one of the first converts. So you have Khadija radiallahu anh, she was the first convert. After that, it was possibly Abu Bakr. Then from the children, it was Ali radiallahu anh. From the slave class, it was Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anh. So the Prophet ﷺ, he arrived in Quba on a Monday and stayed with them for 4 days. So in this time, he laid the foundation of a masjid, and Rasulullah ﷺ laid the first stone himself in the direction of the Qibla, which at that time was Masjid Aqsa. So the Qibla was Masjid Aqsa. This was the first Qibla. Even when Rasulullah ﷺ was in Makkah, the Qibla was Masjid Aqsa at that time. Then Abu Bakr laid a stone, then Umar radiallahu anh, who was also there, laid a stone. Then after the rest of the companions, they started laying stones. Rasulullah also joined in with the companions. He was carrying heavy stones himself, and the companions used to tell him to not carry the stones, but he refused, even though the Prophet ﷺ was approximately 53 years of age at that time. So he was old. He was 53 years, but he joined and he participated with the Sahaba in constructing the Masjid Quba. We'll stop over here inshallah and continue next week. Jazakumullah khairan.